Ford v Ferrari, Ford v Ferrari, or Ford versus Ferrari, however you want to pronounce it, say it, whatever. So yeah, I recently saw it, rented it from Redbox. I had accumulated enough points through the Redbox app that I was able to get a free rental. So, and it's actually a pretty good movie. Of course, it stars Christian Bale, Matt Damon. Christian Bale portrays a guy named Ken Miles, and then Matt Damon portrays Carroll Shelby. It takes place in the 60s, I want to say early to late 60s. And essentially what it is back around this time, again in the 60s, Ford, eventually I guess they got to the point where they had to slow down production, and because they had trouble keeping up with what consumers wanted, essentially. And what that was at that time was people wanted, like sports cars, and so people were buying a lot more sports cars. Of course, mostly men. And so a lot of those sports cars were cars that weren't made in the U.S., such as Ferrari. And so what ended up happening was Ford, they hire Matt Damon's character, Carroll Shelby. They initially hire him to create Ford's fastest car, pretty much. And so Carroll Shelby, at that time he was friends with Ken Miles, the guy that Christian Bale plays. Ken Miles is, I want to say like a race car driver, I guess, like he was professional, I want to say, or at least somewhat professional. It's never like fully, completely explained. But he's definitely, or was, I guess, a damn good race car driver. He was good at just sensing, how fast he should go, like how much he should slow down on certain turns and whatnot. And he was just an awesome driver, and you get to see a lot of that in the movie. So essentially, they experiment with different engines, and then eventually, I believe, they experiment with the V8 engine for the first time, or at least it's like one of the first times that Ford had experimented with like a more compact engine, and not only that, but an engine that could deliver more horsepower and beyond anything that was available at that time. So, and then they enter like several different model cars in different races, like one of them being Daytona. Ken Miles, of course, again played by Christian Bale, he is a driver for one of the cars. I believe it was called like GT something, and yeah, he ends up being a really awesome driver. Of course, initially Ford, they didn't want him to be a driver because they didn't want him to represent Ford. They considered him to be a quote-unquote beatnik, because he was one of those guys that liked to do things his own way, and he was never really a company man, per se. They wanted... back then, I know, like a lot of companies, they were into the whole, having that like image, that clean-cut all-American man image, representing their companies and whatnot. And so yeah, but then of course, what happened was the first race that they entered, Ken Miles, because they didn't want him driving, so they hired some other guy, and obviously, yeah, they lost the race. And because of the fact that driver, he was not as good as Ken Miles. So, but the only reason they hired that other driver was because he had that all-American guy image. So, so then after that, they rehired Ken Miles again, and he went into raced at Daytona, I believe. Daytona Beach, won that race, which then qualified them to compete in this race in France, which I don't know if it still goes on today, but back then it was this huge track, and it was referred to as Le Mans or Le Mans, Lemans, and it was a 24-hour race. So, of course, they would switch off drivers, and then I want to say they had at least two drivers. I mean, so it was Ken Miles and then another guy. They drove in shifts pretty much and took turns resting and all that. And yeah, so I mean, obviously, I don't want to give away too many details. It is a long movie. It's 2.5 hours long, 2 hours, 30 some minutes. Yeah, around there. But it's interesting. I mean, there's really not a whole lot of like technical stuff to it. They do mention certain things, but it's more like this movie focuses more on these two characters, Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby. And I mean, honestly, I knew absolutely nothing about these two guys before. Absolutely nothing at all. I heard about this movie because I came across a lot of good reviews of it. And yeah, well, it's definitely normally not my kind of movie, like not the typical kind of movie that I gravitate towards, but again, I still found it very interesting and at least slightly thought-provoking. And then, of course, it was cool to see all those classic cars back then, like cars from the 50s and 60s. And it was also interesting to see how they would, these different companies, well, for this movie, Ford in particular, how they would experiment with different engines, different body types, for each car. And because I know, like, in this one, it shows, like, in order to make a really fast car, they had to remove a lot of stuff from the car and, to make it lighter. And it's very interesting, because, I mean, obviously at that point, if you want to make a car faster, then you have to have at least a very, I want to say, not even very basic, but, like, you got to, like, really know your math, obviously. Like, of course, like a background in engineering also helps, and of course, all that stuff is mentioned in this movie. But again, it doesn't get like really too technical. I like that because they could have gone like completely technical and like all like just focused on the details, but they didn't because like I said, it just focuses on Ken Miles, Carroll Shelby, and of course, the end, again, I don't want to give anything away, but it was kind of sad, but, it's like, because I mean, towards the end, all I'll say is, like, Ken Miles, yeah, he was an awesome driver, but then, well, I don't really know if I can say too much. I don't really think I can say more than that without giving away the ending. But I will say, yeah, it's just was kind of sad, kind of like, come on, like. So, but ultimately, I mean, afterwards, I Googled some information and whatnot, and Ken Miles was eventually inducted into some kind of Hall of Fame. I forget the exact name of his, like, Driver Hall of Fame or something like that. So, and because, yeah, he was an awesome driver. I mean, no doubt about it. If anything, if, like, I had to, like, describe this movie in just, like, one sentence or one phrase or something, I would say Ken Miles was a fucking awesome driver. Yeah. Ken Miles was fucking awesome driver. That's it. And of course, Christian Bale, Matt Damon, obviously they gave great performances throughout the whole thing, and yeah, in fact, the entire cast really, there wasn't really any. I had no problems with any of the acting throughout this movie. So yeah, I guess because of that, as far as the rating goes, I'm gonna give it a solid 8. Well, yeah, I'm gonna say bare minimum 8, 8.5 at the most. Yeah, 8.5. Just because, I mean, honestly, I didn't know what to expect really, other than, car stuff. But I was yeah, kind of surprised, and I liked that, it held my attention long enough. So, so much so that it made that the 2.5 hour running time really fly by. So, so yeah, 8.5 at the most, 8.5 out of 10. That'll do it for this review. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As always, next time, don't forget to keep it real, keep on rocking, and peace.